So I'm going to start with a piece of journalism. This is the decade where exploration did the talking. Perhaps you've seen many of these journalistic pieces saying that walking simulators pretty much won the last decade of gaming, a non-game genre emerging as one of the major game thing in the last decade. That's fascinating. What are you playing these days? I'm playing Mosaic, which is a depressed office worker simulator, I guess. So you just go to work every day and look depressed. And if you're too tired to walk, you can just go on the conveyor belt and go to the slaughterhouse with your colleagues. Very jolly, very depressing. Just click through it and you'll get to the end. The Steam description goes, Mosaic is a narrative-driven adventure game with a story that lasts about 2-3 hours. Adventure game, really, I find that fascinating. Like when I was a teenager, adventure didn't mean that kind of click-through experience. I'm also playing The Longing, which is amazing. It's based on a German folk tale, the king goes to sleep for 400 days, you're told at the beginning of the game. You're this little shady creature, this shade, and your role will be to just walk around the underground kingdom for actual 400 real-life days. And sometimes you'll face an obstacle and the little shade will say, it seems like this might take 2 weeks to fill up. So why don't you come back in 2 actual weeks? And in the meantime, why don't you go back to your grotto and read a book? There are actual books in the game. So right now, I'm playing The Longing in 4K, reading Nietzsche. And if I'm too tired to turn the pages, you can click on idle reading and the little shade will turn the pages for you. And he will probably be very, very happy that you made him read while you were away, because you're not always connected in 400 days, of course. Wow, okay, that's fascinating. It's an unusual mix of adventure and idle game. What, can you even mix adventure and idle game? How can these two types of performance be accommodated by the same title? Finally, I'm playing Coffee Talk, which is an international sensation right now. It's been translated in many, many languages. It's what we call a visual novel today. You just click through conversation. You don't have a choice of conversation. Every now and then you select 3 ingredients and you will make a coffee for one of these whimsical, wonderful characters. That's it. Coffee Talk is a coffee brewing and heart-to-heart talking simulator. A talking simulator, you just click through. There's not even a choice of conversation, but it's a talking simulator. That's fascinating. In this paper today, I want to raise this hypothesis. What if this trend of non-games is not a major turning point from the last decade or in gaming history? What if games were always non-games or have always coexisted with non-games? I'm expanding on material that I've developed in my platform studies book, The Media Snatcher, but I'm going to talk about other games that are not analyzed in the book. So the paper is named Unearthing Visual Novels on the PC Engine. First, I have to state, along with Yolene Bloom in her Replaying Japan paper, that visual novel is actually not a term that they use in Japan all that much. In Japan, adult computer games, eroge or love simulation games, function as the preferred terms to name cyber media in which sex is the primary means of representation to interact with characters. In this paper, I hope to go beyond eroge, and that's why I kept visual novel. And I think there is a kind of a generic understanding around the term visual novel that's emerging right now. I will start by discussing my methods. I don't speak Japanese, and so this was a bit of a challenge to discuss this largely Japanese corpus. Then we'll move to 2 sub-points that are very important. The notion of database animality consumption. This is a theory of otaku consumption. And then we'll go back to the question, well, are these games adventure games? In terms of methods, I'm lucky to be in a university with a video game lab, but I didn't have the luxury of an institutional archive for the PC Engine. Because the PC Engine was a commercial failure in North America, it's rare to find universities that will collect these titles. I went to the Strong Museum of Play, which has a nearly complete collection of PC Engine games, but it was more than 20 hours away by train. They do a lot to attract scholars and to encourage research. So I'm really giving them props here. Thank God we have the Strong, but I wanted to analyze hundreds of games, so I couldn't spend 8 months at the time at the Strong Museum of Play. That was impossible. So, and building my own collection became less expensive in a way. And that's what I did. And then you realize, oh my God, the retro gamers are really enamored with the PC Engine. These people love the PC Engine and some of the major games like Castlevania X, to the point where it will cost you over $100 for the box. You don't have the game here. If you want the game, it will set you back over $250 for one game out of 700s. Okay, that's difficult there. Thankfully, I did find these very, very cheap games on the platform, like $6 for a Ranma game. What is this? Well, it turns out it's a digital comic, which is, the term visual novel didn't exist at the time. So on the platform, they were called digital comics, and many of them were based on major franchises. Not everybody thinks this is a game, apparently. So if you go to fan-made videos showing clips from all the games released on many platforms, these are really, really useful. I use them in my work a lot. Well, it turns out that the 50 or so digital comics are not in that video. So there's a judgment that these are not real games. I don't know if this echoes the kind of discourse that you might have heard recently, but visual novels, not real games, apparently, for some people. Thankfully, the fan communities have developed this counter-glorifying frame of inspection of history that they call kusoge, from the Japanese term, or shitty games. And as you can see here, it's the cover from a PC Engine game that's called Toilet Kids. It was used as a reference image in the weekly kusoge segment from Hardcore Gaming 101 a few years back. Surprisingly, PC Engine games are rarely appears in these features. I guess they're not shitty enough, perhaps. My main source of, especially to document reception and have a form of proxy play, like people who understand Japanese and who could play all these games, come from the French. And the French connection here is really, really fascinating because the platform was never released officially in France. It was an import operation, and some games were very difficult to get, yet there was a fan community in France that developed, and they have created these Bibles which document all, over 700 games are documented, and you got traces of appreciation, critical appreciation and reception, what it plays like. So it was an essential form of proxy play for me to develop this project. And then I also have to mention that there's an English resource. It's not as complete, but the PC Engine Software Bible does list most of the games, and sometimes you'll get a review, sometimes you will just get a very generic description and some screenshots. Interestingly, here you see that digital comic / visual novel coexists with the term adventure game. Like it's the first digital comic style adventure game on the PC Engine. We'll get back to this question of, is it adventure in the sense that we understand in America? This resource was a big revelation. So when I stumbled across the visual novel database, that was a direct representation of the animality that we'll talk about in a few minutes. It was revealed that there are over 28,000 visual novels that have been documented by this community at this point. And I suspect Japanese people are part of this process at this point, because they realize that outside of Japan, the term is catching attention, so they want to diffuse that information. And 28,000 is not is a significant amount of titles for any genre, and so this would make it a major genre very early on. The reason we might not look into it so much is because it's often beautiful gal games or Lolita games where you discuss in the hope of seducing and removing clothes from a beautiful creature, which is what you see in the background here. So yeah, of course, you cannot hide from the fact that these are erotic, pornographic games catering largely to a male audience. But there are 28,000 of them. So maybe there's more to it than that, right? 300 titles before 1990, 2,000 before the year 2000. So I suspect there's a lot more to it than that. And it's always been a major genre. It's easy to produce, so it's not surprising to see these numbers. On the PC Engine platform, there were at least 54 digital comics on 700 games, including the 400 first CD-ROM games in history on the first CD platform, I mean. So it's not a trivial corpus of games. It was an important part of my research. And then to access the actual research on these games, well, this was the biggest challenge. Thankfully, some of the major books have been translated in English, but not all of otaku studies occurring in Japan are translated. So thankfully, I know Martin Picard and I know Yolene Bloom, and they both helped me, directed me to vital resources and objects to help me develop my project. For instance, Yolene just confirmed that in this book on adult gaming in Japan, there's only one page on the PC Engine, which is surprising for many reasons. We'll get to it in a moment. But the PC Engine is mostly absent from these accounts, as far as I can tell so far. I'm eager to be proven wrong. So what is this idea of consumption, animal consumption? It's a bit of a polemical statement by Hiroki Azuma in his book. He says that there's a big switch in the mid-1990s in the way otaku culture behaves and the way what it looks for. It's always driven by desire for characters, or what they call moe, but there's this idea that instead of being interested in large narrative arcs of grand narratives, they're more becoming database animals. They're binging on little micro narrative fragments that are instantly gratifying, and they will start buying compulsively, like character drawings or figurines at the comic market, for instance, and often user-made elements. Azuma states that this tendency goes back to the 70s, but its significance decisively increased in the context of the 1990s multimedia trend. Again, the PC Engine is at the forefront of this switch to the multimedia trend. So I'm surprised that it's not discussed more commonly. Why is the multimedia trend at the core of database animality and consumption? Well, it's logical. In an interactive medium, not only you buy something, but you can manipulate it. You can customize your desirable character fragments. And if you look at some of the more peculiar objects on the CD-ROM, PC Engine CD-ROM, you find exactly an incarnation of Azuma's theory. Like if you buy the Sailor Moon collection, it's only a collection of easy mini games like rock, paper, scissors, and then you have you can unlock new clothing for your favorite gal, for instance. It's very peculiar. It's directed at young male otakus, many of it, and sometimes you have the impression they end up playing doll games, but of course it's erotic or it's arousing in nature. Yolene critiques this idea of Azuma's database animality. She says that it seems that it's not the individual moe elements that generate a feeling of desire, but rather characters from specific media mixes. So she thinks that Azuma overstresses this micro gratifying fragments consumption. And of course, you can find objects that still rely solely on you are attracted to a character or you just are fascinated by a character. It doesn't have to be sexual. And Pat Labor, which I analyze in the book, is a prime example of this. Like she's this strong female lead into mechas, and she's a police officer, and she's not overly sexualized, as you can see. And if you're interested in the movie directed by Mamoru Oshii, or the TV series, or the media mix of Pat Labor, well, of course, why don't you buy the CD-ROM on the PC Engine, which interconnects with one of the TV series, and so you get more of Noah, and you'll interact with your favorite characters from the show. But sometimes, compared to an adventure games, like the interaction is very minimal, and we'll get back to that in the final section of the paper. So that is not to say that there's a lot of non-erotic visual novels or digital comics. A lot of them have erotic elements, and on the PC Engine, I call this the extended strip poker logic. So not only do you have sexy card games where you play a card game to remove clothes from a desirable character, but even in RPGs or other genres, you would do the regular challenges, like you would fight in an RPG in the hope of seeing more naked women. So in a way, that's what I mean by extended strip poker logic. We've taken the strip poker logic out into other genres. On the PC Engine, there was censorship compared to the computers. The Japanese computers had often pornographic scenes or more, more naked ladies. So that's maybe one reason why it's not attracting scholarship as much, since it's not as pornographic as the computer games. But it was a major component to make it mainstream. For instance, this Blade Runner simulator called Snatcher, a major game in the 80s created by Hideo Kojima, often referred to as an adventure game, but again, a simplified version of an adventure game. You have these random encounters with Bishoujo, and basically you need to interrogate them, but it's a clear nod to the popularity of digital comics or similar games in Japan at the time. And so much, in fact, that the marketing department of Konami decided to name this a CD-romantic. Snatcher is not a Blade Runner simulator adventure game, it's a CD-romantic, which is probably one of the worst pun in marketing history. The PC Engine CD-ROM, as I said, is central to the media mix and the mainstream proliferation of eroge games. Yet, because of the multimedia aspect, because of the CD-ROM, with the CD-ROM, you got close to 2,000 times the amount of data you would get on a small PC Engine cartridge. So you can put a lot more of these arousing images, and that's what we saw in the 400 games that were produced. Then why is it so absent from this type of research? Again, in the media mix and in eroge research, it's mentioned. It's never at the forefront. It's never central. And I'm still quite puzzled. I'm not saying, oh my God, look at my poor platform. It's not represented enough. I'm looking for partners at this point in Japan who are working on the PC Engine and with whom I could collaborate, if you know anybody. Many of these games were referred to as adventure games, as you can see on the sleeves here. In the case of Snatcher, there would be a case for it. In the case of Cobra, it's mostly a click-through adventure. So again, the term adventure is far-reaching in Japan, far more than in America. Is it adventure? And by whose definition? It's a good question, I guess, in the context of this conference.
Carl, you're at 15 minutes, okay?
Thank you, Henry. I think I will be able to wrap this up in 5 minutes. So I wanted to raise this question outside of porn games or eroge games or bishoujo games. I suspect, again, there is a lot more to these 28,000 games than just porn games. And so I found this fascinating digicom on the PC Engine called Yaku Monogatari. It's based on a classical oral game from the Edo period. So it's several centuries old, basically, in which villagers would gather and would light up 100 candles, and they have to tell 100 ghost stories or supernatural stories. And then every time you tell a story, you have to extinguish one light. And the kicker is that apparently this game was never won because nobody was ever able to extinguish the last candle. They were too scared, basically. So an interesting oral narrative game that nobody could win. Fascinating right there. You see in the game, in the digicom, they use this idea of the 100 candles. You don't really have to select attentively which candle you will go to. The little blue light will, like a Ouija board, it will move automatically from one candle to the next, and you can just click through it. And clicking through is what you do. Like as you watch these little stories and read these little stories, you have this cursor and you have to press forward. So I pressed forward on my PC Engine controller for over 5 hours. No, fuck that. I decided to turn auto fire on because I'm sorry, this is not a trivial effort. I had to press a button for over 4 hours to go through this. Thankfully, the PC Engine controllers all include the auto fire mode, which was created for shoot 'em ups, but could be used for visual novels, I guess. The game is a complete win in terms of aesthetics. It's using digitized photographs reduced to 16-color grainy graphics with a lot of dithering to simulate the complexity of the images, but it really echoes many other aesthetic approaches in horror fiction. It's made in collaboration with this famous horror Japanese author. It's using a lot of surreal imagery, Dali-esque double images or Magritte inspirations, or just a lot of very, very unsettling imagery. I will provide 2 links to short video clips I've made of the game on the YouTube channel of the conference at the end of this paper. Then there's this fascinating element. Sometimes you have navigational menus that pop up that do mimic what you would see in an adventure game. And then as a player, you think, oh my God, do I have to make the right selection? Is there a puzzle in there? Is there a specific order I should visit in order to get an Easter egg or something special or unlock something at the end? That's the type of questions that arise as you play this digital comic. Many different types of menus, again, very similar to what you would find in an adventure game. I will jump on these other mechanics. There are other minor mechanics such as a photograph taking mechanic twice in the game. So it's very minimal, it's very rare, it's the exception. Most of the time you click through. And then you got sometimes this fake computer menus, like it's a fake screen augmented interface. You don't click on any of these buttons, you just click through it, and it kind of mimics a summary you would get at the end of a level of your performance, but it talks about the gruesome nature of the crime that they just described, about the amount of victims and stuff like that. So again, it's evoking interactivity, but it's completely click-through. In a recent paper that I've written with Isabelle and Jean-Charles, we analyzed over 140 Western adventure games through hacks. I don't have the time to explain this analytical system in great length right now. But basically, we reached that definition that in the Western world, an adventure game is a resolution game. Your mode of performance is resolution. You try to solve stuff. And it's complicated because your action planning has to deal with 5 categories of mechanics. You do information gathering, navigation, social interaction, resource management, and activation of elements in the space. In a digital comic, typically you would get maybe navigation and maybe social interaction, not in all cases. So it's a reduction of the amount of mechanics that you have to deal with for sure. And you often see the occasional execution minigame. So hit the button at the right moment, a small action minigame in many adventure games that was present. I would make the argument that in terms of design, visual novels can be played as mere actualization game. You click through, the performance is imaginative, short-term, you have minimal engagement, you don't have to prove that you have sensory motor skills or resolution skills. But then at the level of experience, like I said, during these games, as soon as you have a navigation menu, you start being in resolution mode. You start thinking of what if there's a puzzle in there? So I think visual novels and digital comics could be defined as this balance, this ambivalence, I mean, between the 2 modes of performance. You could play it as actualization or you could play it as resolution, simply. And I'll jump through in my conclusion now because I don't have the time for all of this. But in conclusion, there are thousands, again, of these games, which we don't know what to call before 2000. And it seems to indicate there was always a coexistence of real games with talking simulators or gazing simulators or life simulators, whatever you want to call it. If I wanted to be really polemical, I would say that even action games, when you put infinite lives and energy, you end up in walking simulator mode. And maybe this contemplative mode of consumption, maybe the actualization was always present in the various ways we engage with games. I think the main takeaway here is that we have to engage with these 28,000 games to know for sure. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Carl. Let's see.